Well, I have the distinct honor of quieting everyone down after they've eaten. So, the next person who's coming up here is the man who envisioned this conference and brings it to life every year, Jamie Montgomery. Some of you know his name. He's the founder and managing director of March Capital Partners, and one thing I've learned about Jamie over these last few years of working with him is that he's truly one of LA's pioneers in venture capital and investment with a pulse on the next big thing. So with that, I will invite Jamie to the stage.
Yeah, thanks. I think when they say pioneer, they mean old. Well, it's great to have all you here, and those around the campus watching today. We have guests from 5 continents and 16 countries, 27 states, and just delighted to have you here. We have some very special guests here today as well, and we'll hear from a few of them. Just again, I got to say, we have 140 companies presenting, and it's a real struggle to figure out what to do, you know. 11 o'clock, 11:30, 12, but a session like this, we stop everything else and just take a pause and gather our thoughts and look for some great insights from the 2 very experienced leaders of global organizations. They both understand the importance of harnessing technologies for innovation and for driving growth within the enterprises they've run in the past or currently running. And I'll first say a few words about Carmine Di Sibio. He's over 30 years with EY. He's been a global managing partner since 2013, so he's really running the day-to-day client operations. So they have over 270,000 employees across the world, 150 different countries. You can't go anywhere without bumping into them. There's nothing more fun than going to their Entrepreneur of the Year program and meeting these great entrepreneurs from all over the United States, and the global program in Monaco they run in the spring. They've never given me an award. I've always been a runner-up, but maybe if I keep trying, I'm like, somewhere like Bernie Sanders. I just keep running, But, or maybe that's Hillary Clinton. I don't know. Anyway, Harold Stassen was the old name, but no one would remember that name. But Carmine also spearheads EY's innovation efforts, which is managing over a $500 million a year budget in tech investment. So when you think about how the future will work, and Carmine has and EY have a deep embedded commitment to the changing nature of the workforce. You'll hear about how they probably have to hire 60,000 people a year. But anyway, he's EY's new global chairman and CEO-elect, and we're delighted to have him here with us. John Chambers will be having a fireside chat. I asked John if he'd interview Carmine. I asked Carmine if he'd interview John, and their staff said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Well, it's like holding up 2 mirrors. We'll get them together." So it's the old banking days, the smoke and mirrors trick. But John has been a longtime friend and role model and mentor to me. He was served as CEO of Cisco Systems for over 20 years. He grew a business from about $1.2 billion when I first met him, 1994, in this little awkward hotel room in Monterey at the old AEA Fall Classic, where I thought, this is trading at 16 times EBIT, and this company's growing at like 200% a year. I mean, that seems kind of cheap. I didn't have any money at the time, but and he grew it to over $47 billion in revenue. And at one point back in the 2000 time frame, it was the world's most valuable company, and that's quite an accomplishment for anyone. Last year, we started Jc2 Ventures with there's 2 John Chambers. So Jc2, and he has over a dozen companies. I think we're at a half dozen together. And he's also the author of Connecting the Dots, Lessons for Leadership in a Startup World. And John will be, which is quite an accomplishment for a dyslexic to write a book. I mean, it's really something. And it's actually a great book, too. I told him it was a great book, and he was like, "Why are you so surprised?" But it's a great book. I told him today it was a bestseller. He didn't get my joke because I bought 250 copies, so it's out there, So anyway, so it's now a bestseller. Thank you, and John, you're welcome. And after lunch, he'll be signing copies of the book out there, and he's just a great role model, a great ambassador for innovation worldwide. He's advises President Modi in India, President Macron in France, the Israeli government, and we hope to take a road trip to Australia next January and continue to proselyte the world on the great virtues of innovation and entrepreneurship. So John and Carmine, please come on up to the stage, and thank you.
Well, Jamie kind of set us up because I thought I was going to interview Carmine and you thought you were going to interview me, and we realized doing it together. This gets me out of my comfort zone because I've done a lot of interviews, but I've never gone back and forth like this. So it's going to be a fun one to do. Do you want to start off?
Absolutely, John. And first of all, thank you, everyone. Thanks for having us. I am very excited. I have done some of these, and let's start with a question for you, John. And first of all, Jamie brought up the book, and I'm going to try to get our 270,000 people to buy a book.
Okay.
That should help.
Thank you.
No, but in going through the book and connecting the dots, which I think is actually a tremendous title for the book and a tremendous title for everything that's going on here in the last few days. Everywhere I've walked around, people are connecting the dots. People are talking to one another, and I think that's great. But let's start with early childhood. Jamie mentioned that you're dyslexic, which you also had an early childhood adventure, I guess, is what I would call it, in terms of almost drowning. And that's in the book, you talk about how that's, really changed your thinking and also, formulated your thinking as a leader. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think very often we tend to talk about our successes in life and we don't talk about our challenges. And I think a lot of who you are as a leader is more how you handled your challenges in life than your successes overall. And when you said we probably ought to start in this area, at first my reaction was let's start later. And then I think you're right. If you understand how people think and you understand what's important to them in their background, you can pretty well predict what they're going to do and why they do it. The last thing I ever wanted to do was write a book, but I love teaching. And I've learned in teaching, if you come out with 10 points to this audience today and we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, a year from now you won't remember any of them. But if you tell stories and you tie it to the takeaways, then people really get it. For those of you who are dyslexic, how many people are dyslexic in the room?
Wow.
How many have children who are? About 20% of the CEOs are dyslexic. Most of them will never admit that they are. It, to me, was a weakness. And yet at that time, people didn't understand how to deal with it. And I got very lucky, and a teacher helped me learn how to deal with a weakness, and over time, take a weakness and make it a strength. And so once you do that in life, you realize you can repeat it again and again, and you gain the confidence, and you also never treat somebody else bad.
Right.
If people have laughed at you because you read some way, you don't laugh at them the reverse way. But growing up in West Virginia was a unique opportunity for the theme of this whole conference, and that we were the chemical center of the world, Carbide, DuPont, FMC. We were the coal industry for the U.S. The world was happening around us, and we had more millionaires than the United Kingdom did. And because we did not get market transitions, because we kept doing the same thing too long, we developed into one of the poorest states in the nation. And it taught me early on, and my dad was a great teacher, and my mom and dad were doctors, that you've got to play out the hand not 1 year at a time, but 5, 10, 15 years out. And you can see the trends coming, and you either get ahead of them or change them,
Right.
or you get disrupted. I went up to Boston, Route 128, early in my career, and it was the Silicon Valley of the world, and we knew it. And this area out here in California, Silicon Valley, we thought, Californians are kind of unusual. And we didn't have much fear. And we were mini computer companies, and I should have known better because I'd been with IBM mainframes and saw what happened to IBM when the mini computer era happened. And sure enough, the mini computer era, Boston did not move to the internet or to the PCs. And as a result, Wang lost 32,000 jobs. DEC lost 106,000 jobs. Boston never recovered. So I've learned from these life's experience in my early age that disruption waits for no one, that when you combine technology with business model change or society change, that's when there are tremendous opportunities and tremendous downside. So let me reverse it the same way. You came to this country as an immigrant, and some of the lessons learned in life undoubtedly formed your values and formed how you're going to lead your new company. Yeah. Could you share a little bit your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, John. So how many people in the room are immigrants? Let's start with that. A good amount. So I have obviously a very ethnic name. It's very Italian. I immigrated here with my family when I was 3 years old, and we we flew over. We didn't come over on a boat. We flew over on Pan Am, believe it or not. It really taught me about inclusiveness and being included. So, I was a young child that didn't speak English, learned English in school, and I was used to a culture, an Italian culture. So when I went to school, I would eat different foods than the people I went to school with. I would get made fun of because I had a Italian bread with prosciutto and mozzarella in it, and all my friends had bologna and cheese on white bread. And everyone chuckles because today you wouldn't think twice. You'd rather have the prosciutto and mozzarella sandwich. But back in the in the late '60s or the '70s, it was something different. So, I've learned to adapt. I've also learned in terms of what it means by being included or not being included, and that's one of the big things we talk about at EY is really being inclusive. Inclusive in all different ways, not just gender or sexual preference or anything, but really driving teams that have different people on it with different backgrounds because you end up getting a better answer on any business problem that we have. So that has influenced me a lot, John, in terms of just my new role, my old role, my whole career in terms of driving things forward.
One of the most important things I think you have to do as a leader is when you take over, outline what your priorities are and what you want to do. And then I looked at your background, and now I understand why you're the leader. You are focused on innovation. You're focused on technology. You've come up through the ranks, but at the same time are a change agent. How do you take a very successful organization, and make no mistake about it, the biggest mistake an organization can make is doing the right thing too long.
Right.
And how do you take an organization where you've got a certain group that really want to change and expect almost unreasonable things from you, and another group that says, this is how we got here, we need to strike the balance. What are your priorities, and how do you keep them happy?
Yeah, and so I'm coming into this role, and coming into it, we have a long, drawn-out process at EY on how we elect a new chairman and CEO. But of our global board, I have half the global board who says we need to change so many things. We need to change. I have the other half who says, don't change much of anything. Everything's going so well, don't change much of anything. And as I've told people, including like you, John, what do I do with that? The risk is if I just listen to both sides, I'll end up doing nothing, and that will not work. So really going forward for us, it's going to be figuring out what really needs to change. And we talk about innovation. We hired a global innovation leader from the Valley about 2.5, 3 years ago. And we actually did a whole session for our top 120 leaders globally at Stanford two months ago. And we had Professor Jeffrey Moore talk about his 4-quadrant.
He's good at that.
Which I'm sure you know.
The chasm discussion too.
And the fact that if you're going to have innovation at a mature company, you have to separate it out, and you as the leader have to really drive it and drive it forward. And that's something that I think any mature companies in the room, if you talk about innovation, you have to do that. Otherwise, the antibodies of the current business will just destroy anything you're trying to do. So that is, we like to call it Innovation 101. You have to have that set up in the right way.
How much of that getting people to move is based upon the promise of a positive outcome? How much of it is, if you don't move, a negative outcome? How do you strike that balance both internally and with your clients?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because I would say internally for us, the negative, trying to push it from a negative perspective doesn't really work. We have to push it more from what does it mean for us going forward? What does it mean for us positively? We've tried, an example would be our tax business. If you look at our tax business or any tax business, it's all about data, right? It's all about data and technology. And if you can ingest data in the right way and use technology to use the data in the right way and report it back, you might not even need a person in between. But to get there, is a long way off. And so, but it is something that we can be disrupted. So we tried to scare people into it, and it hasn't really worked, to be honest. So it's something that we, we're all working on. What is your advice in terms of leadership, John? You've been obviously a great leader, and now you're also working with startups, but what is your advice on how big companies should work with startups and vice versa?
You know, it's one of the advantages. Jamie referred to it as experience. I've seen every movie. I've been mainframes, mini computers, PCs, internet, digitization, business model change, countries changing, et cetera. And so in watching the changes, what I make my living on, both fund-wise and trying to change society in a positive way and job creation, is getting market transitions right. So I believe as a company, as a leader, you don't focus on the competition. If you're doing that, you're looking out your rearview mirror. In West Virginia, that means you're off the road and you're dead. And I personally find that as a leader, it's also important to think the positives, but be realistic on the negatives. So I use the combination of the two. When you outline a vision for an India about being the fastest growing economy in the world, and you partner with a great prime minister, and he is good. Same thing in France with Macron, and we'll see if the French have the patience to change and the courage. I think they will. But by watching the transitions, it was easy for me to see 4 years ago that India would be the fastest growing economy in the world unless they messed up. And you paint that on the positives and the negatives, and that France would become the best place to do in Europe. And Jamie, you remember the comments when I made that at this session on this stage, I think, and people walked off and said, John, you've been right, but this one, you're out in left field. The key is to watch the transitions and then say, how do you adjust? So as a leader, the first thing is watch the technology transitions and the business model transitions that are going to occur in your industry. And they're going to occur together, no longer separate. And the speed of that change is going to be dramatic. The kiss of death that will cause you to be 40% of the companies in this room, large companies, won't exist in 10 years. 70% of the startups will not exist. What will get you in trouble is you keep doing the right thing too long. And that's true of a startup. The startups start by disrupting their peers, and then they get, well, this is what we do, and just keep doing the right thing. Right. That gets you into trouble. So successful leaders and successful companies, they basically focus on market transitions, both technology and business models combined. You focus on how you've got to disrupt, or you get disrupted on it, and not doing the right thing too long, and painting the positives, and in my opinion also the negatives, that if you don't disrupt. The third thing is the hardest thing for a leader to do is reinvent his or herself. Change is great for others, but I don't need to change. I probably made, Pankaj would keep me honest in this, 5 or 6 major changes in my leadership style at Cisco off of transitions. Probably 4 or so I did on positive transitions, 2 when I got knocked on my tail. And a leader in today's world has to reinvent themselves every 4 to 5 years. That's why most CEOs do not stay in the job much more than 5 years. They keep doing the right thing, and either they or their boards change them because they need somebody to change it again. So there's characteristics I think are key. The last comments I would make is it's amazing how many leaders don't take the time to crisply outline their vision, their strategy of their company or their area of responsibility and how it's different than their peers. How much time on management, you teach that to your clients very well. Culture, which I did not understand as a young CEO, it is what makes a company. And if a culture doesn't evolve, it can be also what causes a company to fail on it. Right. And then I think the speed at which innovation is changing today are the key elements.
You mentioned culture. Culture is something that we're actually very focused on in terms of advising our clients, both big and small, as well as our own culture. And we've actually been doing a lot of work around culture and culture around companies. We do a lot of culture assessments today with our clients because, attracting the right people, you have to have the right culture. And today you have to have a purpose and you have to believe in your purpose. And otherwise, you're not going to hire the right talent. And the culture piece, John, I find it really important, whether it's a small company in the room or a large company. And it's something that I think everyone needs to focus on going forward. And we focused on, we actually just completed our global culture assessment at EY. We had an 80% return rate in terms of the survey. And it's amazing how today, experts around this can do a lot with a minimalistic survey, just by using particular words and so forth, and what do they really mean. And we have found, we're very happy with our culture, but we have found hotspots where our culture is not what we want it to be. And we're acting on that, right away.
It's one of the challenges we all face. Leadership is clearly changing. The days of command and control are over.
Right.
But at the same time, the days when you say we're going to make a decision as a team, a collaborative effort, et cetera, in my experience has been, if you wait for your whole team to get there, or even half of it, it's too late.
Right.
How do you balance that and maybe combine that concept with, is every company going to become a technology company? I clearly believe that it is, and it's going to be interesting given your background. I imagine you're in the same course. But everybody goes, yeah, I've got to become a digital company. What does that really mean?
Right.
And so how do you combine those two characteristics?
That's a great question. So I do think that every company, technology is going to be incredibly important to the company. Now, whether you want to say it's going to become a technology company, I might agree with that, but I wouldn't agree to it that it's going to become a technology company and you don't need people.
Completely agree.
Or you don't need the right people. And we actually a lot of what we need to do is really build up more around technology. So there's always this fear that, we're talking a lot about technology, we're not talking about talent. And you really need both, obviously. But the talent can be very different. So for us, we're out there hiring, a lot of STEM graduates. We're hiring a lot of software engineers now, where we didn't hire as many of those before. And obviously there's a great demand for them, so they're expensive and it impacts your business model.
Very much.
So that, I think that's going to be important, as we move forward. Maybe we should switch to global.
Okay.
Because this will be interesting, because I know you're a big proponent of India. So maybe I thought we'd start with a raise of hands.
Okay.
And then we can get into you and I. If you had $1 to invest, you could only choose one of two places, okay? And I think I know what this room's going to answer. It's going to be down your side, but you could either invest $1 into China or $1 into India, okay? How many, raise your hand, would say India? That's what I thought. How many would say China? John, you won before we even started the conversation.
Well, yes, but because whenever people agree, they're almost always wrong. And so I always watch for the disruption. So when all of a sudden everybody goes, yeah, that's right, I go, all right, now what am I missing? Because either I'm not up far enough or there's a change about to occur. I had an unfair advantage in this in that I was with Wang Laboratories, and Dr. Wang taught me all about China, and I did the first high-tech joint venture in China. We partnered with Jiang Zemin about outsourcing to manufacturing. Unfortunately, invented that for high-tech at the high end. And it was a tremendous experience and a real win-win relationship with the government and business leaders, and truly a win-win, even though they were very tough negotiators. But I made my bet on China in 1995. And it worked. It was the first big bet as I made as a CEO. And like most, when you're out leading, a lot of people question, what are you doing? Obviously, John, it's one thing to say you're a technology company, but to bet on an emerging country, which most people did not see the future on, I got a fair amount of challenges. The nice thing was the market was a little bit more understanding then about talking 3 years out as opposed to this quarter and this year. That might be another question later for us. But if I watched India, I saw the exact same innovation playbook opportunities occur in India when Prime Minister Modi was elected. What I saw was a country that had a very young population. They're educated in citizens, 660,000 engineers per year turning out. And you could suddenly see a country that was ready for change with a leader, and I do believe Modi is one of the top 3 in the world, that can articulate a technology vision with a business vision and then benefit each of the citizens. And so I said literally 4 years ago, if you had $1 to invest in India, $1 to invest in China, invest 2 in India. Because it's the transition that is occurring. That's no reflection on China. I love the Chinese. If I weren't an American, I'd love to be a Chinese. But I think the country that really, if they execute right and have the patience to execute right, it will be India.
Yeah.
Now, let me reverse it. Let me ask the same way for Europe. How many people in the room, if you had $1 to bet on the UK, on Germany, on France, or on Italy? A little bit of humor on the last one. Would you bet? How many people would bet on the UK? How many people would bet on Germany? How many people would bet on France? How many people would bet on Italy?
No, I'm not going to bet on Italy, even though. No.
All right, so no pressure for the home team.
No. Italy's a great place to go, but I wouldn't want to invest in it. So,
Yeah. You know what? What's fascinating is that's where I was in France just 5 years ago. But please.
No, so and we had a little bit of this conversation before. So Europe is difficult, and it's been difficult for us. You know, at one level, Europe and what we've seen in Europe, and even our own growth in Europe, has been resilient. I mean, Europe keeps chugging along. It has all kinds of issues, but it keeps moving along. On the other hand, last year, John, it was all about France. It was all about Macron. I think Germany has had issues politically and with the immigration issue and everything else. But Germany does have great sector focused, whether it's auto or any kind of engineering company and so forth. And I think if they can move through it, I think they'll be fine. I mean, look, in everything we're talking about here now, demographics are a big, big factor.
Yes, they are.
And Europe's demographics are horrible. Italy, there'll be more Italians everywhere else, but in Italy going forward, Western Europe is not much better. France and Germany are not much better. We talked about India and China. India demographically has an advantage over everywhere. One of the people we work with, one of the professors we work with, he goes through a whole demographic thing around. He puts up a number and says 2.1, and people are like, "What does 2.1 mean?" 2.1 is the amount of children a woman needs to have to maintain the population flat. She needs to replace herself and her spouse or her partner, plus the 0.1 is not everyone reaches childbearing age. Okay? And when you do the demographic study, India and Africa are the only two places in the world, and some of South America is close, where the number is bigger than 2.1. Even the US is below 2.1. And that is a huge advantage for some of these geographies. And Europe, unfortunately, that's not the case. So I actually would be more negative on Europe in general, except for it's been resilient.
It really has in so many ways. It's fun to watch because the nice thing about being my own company, I no longer have to be politically correct or watch what I say and the implications.
I do, for
Yeah,
a lot of
you do.
reasons.
So I'll balance this well. But I had the chance to meet with the Chancellor, and I have tremendous admiration for her leadership, and I think she has absolutely been the leader in Europe over the last decade. But when we talked about change and technology changes and her Industry 4.0 program, she says, "John, we are all over this. We don't need any help from technology companies from America. We're committed as a country to making this transition, and we meet every 6 months on it." So I went over to the UK next. But what I'm saying is you can, without realizing it, lull yourself to sleep about just keep doing the right thing, because Germany clearly is the economic powerhouse in Europe, manufacturing tremendously, the brand names, the economic power, work ethics amazingly, democracy, intellectual property protection. But if you don't have the courage to change, and if you wait too long, you all of a sudden get left behind. And so it surprised me a little bit how that merged. And as I alluded to, the last place I would have bet on the world was France in terms of jobs and job creation. So I think as we watch these transitions occur, how do each of us in either our personal lives or giving back or in our business lives get these transitions right? I want to spend a moment because it's often dangerous when you say to one of your friends, Carmine, this is one of the things that I think you all could really make a huge difference on for the global economy, is that I believe most innovation is going to come out of the small companies. They're able to attract, candidly, the majority of the students out of the key universities, whether it's IIT in India or Polytechnique in France or Stanford or MIT here. And secondly, the small companies, I think and you're seeing less and less companies be public, and the pressure on the public companies are more quarter and yearly basis than before, most are not going to be able to move with the speed of innovation they need. That sets up an issue where large companies who are really going to be innovative are probably going to partner with small companies in a way they never have before. And the numbers are breathtaking. Usually you would do a proof of concept, you'd dance very slowly, over 3 or 4 years earn the trust of a large company and go. We're now seeing startups go from $1 million a year to $70 million a year, their average order 10 to 15 million. Partnerships like Spark Cognition I mentioned with Boeing and $30 million joint venture where Spark provided the people and Boeing provided the innovation together. Yet, most companies will mess this up on both sides. So if you were building a practice to teach the large companies how to work effectively with startups, not to love them too much or love them too little, and you were teaching small companies to how you work effectively with large companies, how would you even get your head around that, and how would you go to the people in this room on both sides and approach it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, this is something that we do and we have been doing. We actually have a few events around this too. We call them Innovation Realized, our next event, where we invite large companies and small companies.
Yep.
It's exactly the point you're saying, John. We have our next event in April in Boston. We've had them in Europe. We've had them in Asia. And the concept is, basically to your book, connecting the dots. But I would have this advice for large companies in the room. You have to understand that small companies don't know how to interact with you. So I'll use ourselves as an example. We're terrible for a small company to sell into EY or to talk to us about something. A, they don't know who to go to. B, it's complicated. C, they get stuck in some area that's never going to make a decision. 4, we're slow. So then if I give advice to small companies, finding the right place to interact with at a large company is probably issue number one. Okay, making sure, and many times it's not the CEO, it's not, but it's the right person for whatever your solution or your technology or whatever it is. That's critical. And sometimes it's not the CIO. It depends on what you're trying to sell and what your ultimate product is. So that's point one. Point two is, to be patient, because to make sure that your sell and your product is clear on how the large company can use it. Okay, large companies that have a lot of legacy systems, and it's not easy for them to move off things and to change things and so forth. So you have to be clear on the advantages they're going to have with your product or your solution, how quickly they can implement it, and how can it scale. Scale is a big factor because there are a lot of smaller companies that come to EY that want to partner with us in the marketplace and so forth, but then they also want to sell us whatever the solution is. And the problem is, it's a great solution for a 20-person firm. It does not scale. So that has to be really thought through. But to me, the great thing about this conference and some others and some of the things we do is connecting the two types of organizations. I really believe going forward, and you could read a lot of this as well, companies in general are going to be very different. The borders on what a company is and what a company is not are going to be much more fluid. We use the word ecosystems. There are other words that are used, but a company is going to involve a large ecosystem with a lot of different people that help you in a lot of different ways. And you're going to compete with some of them. You're not going to compete with others. You're going to partner with some. A lot of this is going on today, but it will be more and more as we move forward.
Yeah, I think this is why it's so important to identify market trends and compete on the trends, both technology and business, than it is to compete the way you used to and view your competitors of the past as your most likely competitors of the future.
Right.
They never were at Cisco. Our competitors at the present, most of them didn't make it more than 10 years, and we wouldn't have made it if we didn't change within it. For the startups 5 years ago, in the room, if we were having the conversation, I would have looked at you and say, can you get a strategic partnership with a large company? And they'd say, absolutely yes. And I'd say, how are you going to go about it? And then I'd let them talk for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I'd say, in my opinion, a small startup, with very few exceptions, can never get a strategic partnership with a large company, because the large company, what do they look for in strategic partnerships? It's got to make a difference on their top line. If you're a $20 billion company and the small company's talking about $1 million, you're rounding error. Right. At Cisco, I didn't even know Pankaj, in investments we made that were below $5 million. We bought 180 companies, right, and I knew those, but the investments were very small. Secondly, it usually was not material to me in terms of my strategy. My thesis is what has changed is the large companies want to use startups to both be more innovative. They believe that either what they do with the startup can cause them to grow their revenue faster, or they get their culture helped to be changed to move at a different pace as you do this. And all of a sudden, a small company, you see the big companies take them in to meet head of government and others if they can find a way to work together.
Right.
In the book that I wrote, and I wrote it more as teaching, and something I thought I would never do, which is I'm not a process person. In fact, process used to equate to bureaucracy, which equated to slow. But yet I found innovation playbooks could move with tremendous speed. Think about how would you wrap an innovation playbook if you had the startups here and the enterprise companies there, and how would you address it? And this is kind of thinking together on it.
Yeah, it's well, I think this goes to both sides here, but I do think it's some process here is important actually. Now that you mention it, because I do think having a routine on how this happens, and actually it's good advice even for us to develop more of a process around this as opposed to it being more ad hoc. So I think that's good advice for us. Can we change?
Absolutely.
Let's talk about the U.S.
Okay.
And a lot of talk around jobs. What's your view in terms of job creation in the U.S. And what needs to happen going forward?
I usually have a real strong view of the economy. Might not be right, but I have a strong view, and I've bet on both sides and been pretty accurate. Missed 2001, got 2008 right. If you were to ask me in the November-December time period, I was more concerned. If you were to ask me now, I actually feel things are dramatically better, still very fragile. And the implications for jobs is very good. The implications for M&A activity, I think if you were to take the pulse of the financial people in the room, that's really starting to pick up. Surprisingly, January, February, early March, much stronger. Companies thinking about it going IPO, at least the ones I touch, are either accelerating it or much more in terms of their vocabulary. And I think actually, unless we mess it up, which we're very capable of doing, this year will be better than most people think. However, I think that's the problem. I think what we're doing is continuing to do the right thing too long and correcting things we should have corrected a long time ago on taxes, incentives, trying to cut down regulation. If you believe, as I do, that 40% of the jobs, 40% of the companies in the room will be gone in 10 years, and 70% plus of the startups will be, and if you believe that AI and technology and digitization will destroy 20 to 30% of the existing jobs, it says to generate 25 million new jobs in the next decade, let's look from 5 years to 15 years out, have to be done entirely through startups. And if you believe that, which I do, and we were at a 20-year low on startups just 3 years ago, and as a country, we've moved from number 1 in innovation, using the Bloomberg Index as an example, to number 11. If we don't dramatically, and I mean dramatically, increase the number of startups, but also do it inclusively across all 50 states, we're going to be left behind. So I'm optimistic on the short run. I'm actually extremely concerned at 5 to 10 years out. We are going to continue to do the right thing too long, and all of a sudden we're going to be stuck. Yeah. So kind of a mixed view. Is that anywhere close to how you see it?
Yep. No, I see it pretty much the same way. I do think, we were talking earlier in terms of job creation in the U.S., blending technology and innovation with jobs is important. And we were talking earlier, I don't know how many people read, we actually have a shortage of truck drivers in the U.S. all of a sudden, which when I read this article, I was shocked because, we're going to have self-driving trucks, and we don't need truck drivers, but now all of a sudden we have a shortage. So timing on some of this is incredibly important. And I do think when it comes to jobs in the U.S., we need to do more around education, around technology, and having people who are qualified to do jobs of the future. And I do think, and I mentioned it yesterday on a panel, our education system around technology is too slow, and I think we're behind. And I do think in some countries that they're ahead. And to me, that's going to hurt us going forward if we don't change this quickly. And it's something that we do think about, and we do think about at EY in terms of how do we help here? How do we help in terms of education and educating, the public on technology, on jobs for the future, and so forth. We think we do a good job ourselves. We train a lot of people. We hire 60,000 people every year. We lose like half of them every year as well. Where do they go? They go out to companies. They're financial people, they're technology people, and so forth, out at our clients, out at our non-clients, and everything else. So we think we do a good job educating, but we need to be faster, and we need to be more on top of educating people that don't have the means to be educated today. So I think that's a big factor on job growth in the U.S. In particular. If I could switch, I wanted to just if I could switch back to global, because it's one thing that we talk a lot about in terms of, and this gets into a little bit of politics, but I always say the business world is global, and country borders are really just that, country borders. But I think there are a lot of startups in the room, probably more startups than large companies. So in your startup, raise your hand if you thought on day one your marketplace is global. Okay, that's interesting. I thought it might be more.
It's a good question.
I thought it might be
question.
more.
I like it.
How many people have a global marketplace right now? About the same. So it's, I would have thought actually it'd be a bigger portion of the room that would have thought their marketplace is global, because one of the things we see is today with technology, almost on day one, your marketplace can be global. It doesn't mean it has to be on day one, but there's no reason why you can't sell your product, your solution, and so forth around the world with technology the way it is today, versus 20 years ago or 30 years ago where everything was much more local. Mm-hmm. And to me, the global mindset, even of startups, is important, because I do think you A, will have a better time teaming with a large company. B, I think it'll open your eyes in terms of what's happening out there globally. And 3, your competition is not just going to come from the U.S.
That's right. In fact, majority of startups in this room may not even be U.S.-based.
Well, that's true.
In terms of the balance. I would add to that, it's so important to establish your base, whichever country you're in, and to be able to be one of the top 3 or 4 players within that country. If you can't get that in your home country, it's going to be hard to get it as you move to the U.S. or vice versa in terms of direction. We've hit on a lot of areas, and it just, especially as a young CEO, I felt that I had to have an answer to whatever question was asked, and I had to seem almost unbeatable because the company during tough times was going to lean on me and pull me forward. Later, I learned that it's a lot better just to be candid on what you know and what you don't, but also sharing with people about the mistakes you make, because then they'll see the successes that everybody else talks about, how the balance has occurred. Is there one mistake, one do-over that you in your career that really made a lasting impression? And the question is, if you had it to do over, what would you do differently? Or did you have a chance to do it over? And if so, how did you play it?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking that. So I almost left EY, almost every year for a while, but then seriously, probably 2 or 3 times, and looking back now, obviously I'm glad I didn't leave, but I was leaving for a startup in the .com kind of era, and it was a startup exchange really that I was going to go to, and at the end of the day, I just didn't feel comfortable, and I didn't leave. Now, obviously sitting here today in front of all of you, I made the right decision. Well, who knows? Maybe not. But these are things that, along the way, fortunately for me, I got to do a lot of different things at EY. I was a part of a joint venture where we were selling software for 2 years to banks. And so when we talk a lot about technology today and selling technology and so forth, I know what it's like to get someone to sign on that dotted line before the quarter end and everything else. Mm-hmm. We were really treating ourselves as if we were a startup and a new company. So I've gotten to do a lot of really good things. I've lived through the financial crisis, which for me was an incredible experience. I was our head of financial services while that was going on, and it's something that that I've never experienced anything like before. But I've learned so much from it in terms of really the biggest factor when you really get right down to it, and even when you look back, is we put a lot around relationships, and I think, and this is something that's been written in some books on the financial crisis, but relationships and who trusted who during that crisis made a difference in terms of how it shaped up going forward. And you know, I think there were some firms that were less trusted by others, and others that were more trusted. And I think the ones that were more trusted survived today, and the ones that weren't did not survive. So I have to ask you then, John, advice in terms of your career. What's the mistakes that you've made versus the things you did well? What can I learn from that?
Two categories, perhaps. I've made lots of mistakes, and we could list them all the way through. I try to make them only once, but I believe, however, if you're not taking risk, if you're not dreaming big, you get left behind. And that's what happened to most of my peers in our industry for it. The one that was most visible and the one that hurt the most was clearly 2001. We had grown conservatively at 65 to 70% per year for a decade. We were able to beat all of our traditional competitors, but we also swung really good and took on the startup competitors well. And if you can imagine, during that time period, we did not miss our forecast, internal forecast, by more than 1 or 2% for the whole year. We ran our books so that we could close our books with 24 hours notice anytime we wanted. We could see a problem coming and we could adjust, et cetera. And so when the stock market began to drop in the second half of 2010, I looked at our data, and our data was unbelievably good. I mean, I could tell you what our sales were by day, by week, by time of month, and I could tell you if I was going to be off or on versus prior forecasts 10 years back forward. And so we were in the
This was in 2001.
2000, before 2001 hit. December 2000, the orders for the first week in December were 70% growth. We were only projecting 35 to 40% growth for the next year. Everything looked in line, but the stock market had been dropping for several months, and all of a sudden, things were a little bit nervous, and we looked at our data and it said, no, it's going to continue. So we made a conservative forecast, but it wasn't near conservative enough because what I missed was the dramatic transition that was about to occur. We'd never grown less than 40%. By 45 days later, we grew minus 30% in January. Mathematically impossible. 25% of our customers disappeared. Wow. Worst year of my life. Lesson learned, however, at the time was we did make our changes. And this is where leadership, I think, has to put the company on his or her back and go. Once we saw it start to occur, we said it was a 100-year flood. We literally met in the middle of the night and looked at how we were going to make the changes. We announced it the next day with just a phone call to our board and then to the public. We made all of our changes in 51 days. And I made the mistake of saying it's a 100-year flood coming at us. And they said only Cisco is going to get hit by this. And we all know what happened. Fast forward to 2007. 2007, I'd learned my lesson, and I am a risk taker. But in 2007, we were growing in the summer at a very good growth rate. We were going to hit our 30% type of growth numbers. And as I was watching the data come in, all of a sudden, the top financial organizations in the U.S. slowed dramatically. And I called up my friends who were CEOs, and I said, what's going on? And they said, no, I don't think there's much going on at all, just a little bit caution. But I connected the dots very quickly. And when all of them slow at the same time, there's something coming at you aggressively. We said on our conference call in August that there's something wrong in the market. We're going to hit our forecast for next quarter, but we think there's a fundamental change going on, and we think it's more serious than anybody's thinking about. Stock got killed, but by the middle of 2008, the country started in free fall that we referred to. The difference was this time we were positioned extremely strong. We extended credit to the automotive companies at a time no one else would for the purchases. They'd always been with us during the good times. We wanted to be with them when they needed us most, and we powered through that one without missing a beat. The key takeaway is learn from your mistakes probably more you do your successes. Don't trust your data too much. And when inflection points happen, what was the right rule of the past is not the right rule for the future. Bring us home. Last thoughts for this audience.
Well, first of all, again, thank you to everyone for sitting through this. Where one of the things that I always think about in terms of this audience is, think through, how you're going to attack the market, how you're going to partner with larger firms. If you are a large firm, how are you going to partner with startups? EY, we're here to help, in any way. But really, I am a little bit surprised. Think of your market as global. I really think that's important. I'm a little bit surprised on the hands on that. And John, what about yourself?
I'd leave you with just a couple of thoughts which we've touched on. What causes you to fail is missing the disruptions as business model and technology works together. Watch for those. Don't do the right thing too long, even if you're a startup and your numbers are good. When you think about it, I got criticized, and part of it was fair, for perhaps dreaming too big and taking on too many things, and on corporate social responsibility, trying to change the world. Actually, wherever we were number one in corporate social responsibility, we were number one in profits. So I would challenge the room to dream a little bit bigger. How do you truly make a difference in India, Sub-Saharan Africa? Right. How do you set goals for yourself? If you're one of 10 companies growing well, you probably won't exist in a decade. Dream bigger, take more risk. When mistakes happen, you don't celebrate mistakes. I can't use that word, but when mistakes happen, that's part of good leadership. As an investor, I actually like for the CEOs to go through that learning period, but have the courage to really dream. And I do think you can do almost anything you want if you really understand your markets and understand your differentiation and go make it happen. Your currency, you said it earlier, track record, trust, relationships.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for the time. And
Carmine, thank you. It was a lot of fun. That actually worked reasonably well.
Yeah, I thought it was
Jamie's
okay.
smarter than we give him credit for. Jamie, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jamie.